catches up. It's just in a whirly line at the moment. Oh, here we go. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be live with Sarah Ward. Sarah, do you want to start us off with an introduction to you and your books?
Yeah, my name's Sarah Ward. I'm a crime writer. I've also written some historical crime as Rhiannon Ward, sort of gothic thrillers. And I have had published 8 books, the latest of which is The Sixth Lie. I've only got the one book. I haven't got any of my other books because I'm at my dad's house, but I did have a copy with me. And it's the second book in my new series, which is set in West Wales, which is where I now live. So that came out at the beginning of November.
Yeah, I've read a few of yours as both like Sarah and Rhiannon.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, there's a sort of organic flow of my books because I love, crime fiction, contemporary crime fiction. That's what I started writing, set in the Peak District, which was where I was then living. And then my books usually have a sort of cold case, a sort of a case in the past that's investigated in the present. And in my Derbyshire books, I was going further and back in time. So my first one was set in the 70s, and then one was in the 80s, and then I went back to the 1950s. And because I wasn't born in the 50s, I really enjoyed doing the research, and I thought, God, I'd really like to write a full historical novel. So my first one, The Quickening, was set in 1920s, and then I went even further back for The Shadowing into the 1830s. And then I thought, I really miss actually contemporary crime, so which is why I started my Welsh-based series. But I use the sort of gothic elements in my Rhiannon Ward books into my Welsh ones, because Wales is very gothic. Those of you who visited it know there's lots of churches, and, dark woods, and deserted places. So so there's a kind of organic. It's not like I'm writing contemporary or I'm writing historical. There's a nice flow between how I've written the books.
There's definitely a lot of links to like churches and Welsh myth legends, isn't there, in The Sixth Lie?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly a learning experience for me because most writers, we write what we're interested in, but we also like to write about what we don't really know, but we'd like to know a bit more about. It's all part of the research process. And I love visiting churches. I can't pass a church without stopping. And there's a lot of churches in Wales, believe me. I did an event at a bookshop, Kibworth Books in Leicestershire, a couple of years ago, and I was driving down, and I was quite late. I wasn't going to be late for the event, but I was pushing it, to get there half an hour before or whatever. And as I was driving past, I saw a sign, and it said "Abandoned Church." And if I'd had any more time, I'd have been down that road straight away. Unfortunately, I had to go straight to the bookshop. So in the back of my mind, there's an abandoned church that I really, really need to
go back and see.
I do. I need to speak to the bookshop and try and go back just so I can visit the abandoned church. But yeah, I'm interested in mythology as well. I mean, even in my Derbyshire books, I tried to sort of talk about things that happened in Derbyshire, like the drowning of the making of the reservoir, which drowned Ashopton village, and I integrated that into the Tragic Path, which is not like a legend like the Welsh, sort of. My latest book, The Sixth Lie, set partly in St. Non's, which is supposedly the birthplace of the mother of St. David. So that's a really long way ago. Whereas the drowning of the reservoir at Ashopton was in the 1940s. But I think even modern day legends, they sort of integrate themselves into a place. So I do like to put it in my fiction because it adds to the sense of place, really. And it's something I'm interested in. So wherever I'm setting my books, sometimes I know the legend. So The Birthday Girl, the first in the Welsh series, was partly set based on Caldy Island. I called my island Eldey, but I knew all the mythology of the Welsh islands. They're often sort of places of saints, and there's often quite holy places on these islands as well. So I do like to, but then it gives me the chance to have a little bit more of a research and find out a little bit more. Although, funnily enough, there's often not a huge amount on the internet for Welsh stuff. You have to go to libraries and so on to find it. It's not as well documented as English myths.
That's interesting. I think like abandoned churches and really old ones can be, without wanting to offend anyone, a little bit creepy at times. Like,
yeah.
Quite...
Churches are definitely creepy. I mean, I go to church, as in, on a Sunday I go, but I still think they're creepy. I'm not concentrating on the service. I'm having a good look round, and I'm looking at these sort of effigies and these stone things. I mean, the church in Lampeter, I live in Lampeter, which is in West Wales, in Ceredigion, and in the church, when I go up the churchyard, it's got the normal gravestones, and then it's got these rows and rows of tiny graves. And what they are from the workhouse. Now, most people, when they were in the workhouse and they were buried, and in fact, I wrote about this in the shadowing, they just put in a mass grave, basically. This is in the 19th century. Whereas in Lampeter, they were given an individual gravestone, which is really, really unusual. But it's just numbered. There's no like name or not even initials. You're just given a number. But they're a reminder of how we did things differently then, and it is quite creepy as well, especially if you go up at night. In fact, when I was living in Derbyshire, I used to sing in a choir in the next church village. So I had to drive there, and the car park was in the churchyard. So you'd go through the church gate in your car, and then you'd go through some graves, and then you'd park next to a grave, and you'd walk over the graves to go into the sort of side chapel and do your choir. And I used to think, no wonder I'm writing gothic.
Putting you in the mood.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a church near where my nan lived when I was little that was meant to have Anne Boleyn's heart buried under the organ.
Under the organ?
Okay. And I think it was under the organ. Yeah. I wouldn't go in when I was little because I was convinced you would still hear the heart beating.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, my goodness. You're channeling Edgar Allan Poe there. Oh, my gosh.
I was, yeah. I was absolutely terrified of it. I wouldn't go anywhere near.
Well, it's like Caldy Island that I just mentioned. You mentioned about sort of based on my island of Eldey. So I grew up in South Wales in Neath, and there's a famous abbey, Cistercian abbey in Neath called Neath Abbey. And my mum used to love it. She loved anything ruins. This is where I inherited my love of the Gothic. And my mum used to tell stories in this deserted abbey, like, the ghost at night of the monk in this habit comes and, sort of, and if you're not good, if you're naughty, the ghost will come and get you. And then when I went to school, some sort of 5, and the head mistress said, we're organising a school trip to Caldy Island, and you get to see the monks, because it's got a monastery on Caldy Island. You get to see the monks, and I was absolutely terrified. It's like, no, monks are ghosts. I didn't realise they were sort of living monks on a monastery. Perfectly amiable men, sort of making milk and so on. But it's amazing how the imagination works, doesn't it? Really.
But I think that's what's good about stories.
Mm. Yeah, it is. When I was researching the second of my Rhiannon Ward books, The Shadowing, part of it was set in a place, and the names escape me now, but in Nottinghamshire, which was Byron's family home, and in the neighbouring parish, his body he's buried there, and I put something around about they claim the whole body's there, and in fact when they excavated the crypt, it's the family crypt, when they excavated the crypt in the later in the 19th century, they found his physical body shape looked like how he's described, so they're pretty sure he's there. But I used to live in Greece, you see, and Missolonghi, which is where he died, they claim his heart's buried there. And then I put something online and somebody else came on and said, and this is where this is buried. So there's parts of Byron everywhere, and every place has a story about sort of Byron. And I think it's quite interesting that sometimes not one place lays claim to somebody,
Exactly. Leslie said hello to us. What I like about The Sixth Light, I think I'm trying to word this in a way that I don't want to cause offence, but it reminds me of like a lot of the kind of classic YA crime that's been out, like One of Us is Lying, and
okay,
13 Reasons Why, I think, because you've got to work out, you've got the premise of everybody's lying in the story, and they've got to work out why. And I just was thinking of those, like, I love those books. It was genuinely a nice compliment.
Oh, thank you. Do you know what? I don't read YA, so that is completely accidental. It is interesting. I mean, sometimes, like when I was writing The Birthday Girl and it was set on an island, I was deliberately didn't like read any books set on an island because you worry that you're going to pick up some influences, even sort of subconsciously. So, whereas The Sixth Lie, I just came up with this idea of people lying, and some of the lies are really small, aren't they? They're almost omissions, really. But you get up ahead of steam, so much so that by the time you come to the sixth lie, it's quite a significant lie. And that's all it came from. I had no idea about the YA. Although interestingly, it's a bit shorter than my usual books, and maybe it's the length as well because I sort of packed more into it in a shorter book. Because books I often find is a natural length, and the only other thing to make it longer would have been to put a sort of another subplot in or something. But actually, I didn't want to do that because the plot was around these lies, and so it would have seemed a bit daft to put a subplot in it. Oh no, that's interesting.
I think maybe because, like, if you do like YA, I read loads of it. I don't know if it's just a teacher thing, but like, there's quite a lot of like really good quality kind of YA crime that's based around an event that's happened and then like the lies that people have told or the subterfuge around it. And that's quite a common kind of YA crime thing, but I've never read it in an adult crime book in the same way. And I really liked it. I was like, this is really good because this is like, if you were enjoying those, if you grow up reading like Pretty Little Liars or One of Us Is Lying, any of those things, you could then pick up The Sixth Lie and be like, yeah, this is like what I want to go on to read as an adult.
Oh, well, thank you, Caroline. That's really interesting. And I'll obviously try and have a look at those books. Now it's published and I can't be accused of, sort of doing anything that someone else has done. Oh, no, I'll definitely read them.
They're definitely not a copy. Do you know what I mean? It's very unique. The way you've done it is really interesting.
Well, it was the second book in the series, and the first one, because it's on an island and therefore a really close setting, and I wanted to do more of the series. I thought, do I really want to do close settings all the time? And the answer is no, basically, especially as there's a police procedural element in the Sixth Lie and will be in books going forward. So it was like, well, but I do like the sort of tightness of a closed setting. So what else can you do? And I thought, well, the tightness of the suspects then is a way of, the sort of plotting, making it a tighter plot to keep the sort of idea of a closed plot, but not in the closed setting. And now I'm working on book 3. I've nearly finished it actually, and it's substantially there. I've done all the plot, but what I haven't got, I don't think yet, is that close either setting or the close suspects. So I'm just thinking about that, how to sort of weave that in, really. It's interesting. I think what's interesting is when I read, because I read a lot of crime fiction, and what I take from a book isn't always the same, because I'm a judge on one of the daggers, and when we come to have our sort of judging, it's interesting that we've taken different things from the same book, basically. Everyone reads it slightly different, don't they?
I think as well, you've got quite a closed, small community.
Yeah.
Haven't you? Especially like obviously in the first one, it was very closed, but even in the Sixth Lie, there's like the weather and the like where they live all feels quite small town. It's got that very small town vibe, hasn't it? Where everyone knows each other and
because it's set in St David's, which is a city because it's got a massive cathedral there, but it's tiny. It's smaller than most towns. It's literally got a cathedral. It's got about 20 shops, and then there's a sort of hinterland of housing, and that's it. And it's really isolated. Pembrokeshire is really isolated, and there's that small community. And where I live in Lampeter, which is a different county, it's Ceredigion, but it's again small communities. I love small communities anyway. I was writing about them in my Derbyshire books, but it's this idea that when I go and see somebody, say I went into my local garden centre for the first time. I've only been living there since July, and I introduced myself because I was buying some stuff, and various people I'd met already, he knew them all because, you know, everybody knows each other. So, you know, it's the place where open secrets fester, really. I'm not talking about Lampeter because I don't know of any open secrets there, but put them in your own book because, and sometimes it can be quite hard to explain to somebody who lives in London, for example, that, you know, something can happen quite a long time ago and people won't forget because that's the way small communities work. So yeah, you have to be sort of it's the sort of thing I love. You know, the sort of whole closed community and lots of secrets in them.
Do you like that in where you live as well? Do you like to live in like a small town?
Yeah, so when I was in Derbyshire, I lived in a village. So it was really, really rural. And there was nothing in the village apart from a pub and a church. So I had to drive everywhere. And I knew all my neighbours. I probably knew about my nearest 15 neighbours well. I mean, because it was that small community. And I did write about that a lot in my Derbyshire books. Now, I've moved to a town in West Wales, but it's really, really rural. So it's not near anywhere, Lampeter. But it's got a university there. So it's kind of... so I'm living in a town now. I don't have to get in my car and drive anywhere. I can walk to the post office. I can walk to, but it's one of these like tiny towns where it's almost like a child's book of a town. It's got an ambulance. It's got a fire station. It's got a school. It's got a church. Well, it's got lots of churches actually, churches and chapels. This is Wales, but it's like almost like an idealised town. It's got everything in there because it's not near anywhere. You can't sort of go to the next town for the ambulance service, for example. It serves the whole hinterland of the countryside. So yes, I do love them, but I think now I'm in a town. I think I love a town more than living in the countryside, which is what I was doing before. I just like opening my gate and going out in the morning, and I can take my laptop now under my arm and go and work in a cafe, which I couldn't do. I used to have to get in the car. So I've ended up using my car a lot less, which is brilliant, to be honest. And we were talking about before we went live, weren't we, Caroline, about your bus, you getting the bus every day. I sort of, when you put your updates on Facebook, because I find people's lives and their journeys to work and all the hassles you have on a commute fascinating, because it's how people live, isn't it? And it's always great for stories, basically.
It's just one of those, isn't it? We had someone in taking photographs for the school website yesterday, and we needed to set up, like, our room was first, and we needed to set up loads of stuff for it. And I was like, I can do it all in the morning. And then my bus disappeared, and I was like, no, I've got so much work to do.
Yeah, it's because you live in Leeds, do you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, nice city, Leeds.
It is. It's a big city, but it has a small town vibe.
Oh, does it? Okay. Because
I think you sort of have, there's like nice communities where people do know each other. And
yeah, I work one day a week in Sheffield still, just till June, and it's got a similar vibe actually. You know, lots and lots of people know each other. It's a nice city, Sheffield, actually.
Yeah, I moved here for university, and Sheffield was my second choice.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I think they're rival cities, aren't they, in a way, like Manchester and Liverpool are as well, really.
Yeah, I loved Sheffield. It's got such a nice university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
What's it like teaching as a writer? Is it quite... You get students who've read all your work? And
No. So I teach for the Royal Literary Fund, which quite a few crime writers do, actually. They employ professional writers, and they put you in a university to do one-to-ones with students who just want help with their writing. And we don't comment on content, so none of my students are creative writing. And if they were creative writing students, I wouldn't be able to comment on the content. It's to help them with the mechanics of writing, really. Now, I'm in the science department, so when I was first told, "Oh, you're going to go into the science," look, I don't know anything about science. But you do pick it up quite quickly. So really interesting stuff from like DNA and lots and lots of sort of cancer research and so on. And lots and lots of science students have got to to do their degree, and they've never written an essay, because you can do physics, chemistry, biology, and not write essays for your A levels. So I really do help them with their writing, which is brilliant, actually. And some of the stuff is really, really fascinating. But the first year, when I first joined, there was a bit of a sort of power struggle for offices. So we were scrabbling around for an office, and they put me in an office opposite the dissecting room. And it was like, out of all the sort of most atmospheric places. And occasionally I'd go to the toilet and I'd see a sort of student who was feeling a bit faint, having just, medical student who was just learning to dissect the bodies, It was absolutely fascinating. It has been absolutely fascinating.
It is cool. Science departments in universities tend to be really interesting, don't they? Places to be.
Yeah. And the students are really bright and pretty motivated, because I was a bit of a slacker at university. These students are really, really motivated. So we have, really interesting discussions. And as one of the students did something on the Golden, is it the Golden Gate, the San Francisco, your Golden Gate Bridge killer, and it was just so fascinating. And I like doing lots of research, and I sort of skim over papers, so it's quite nice to meet people who are absolutely passionate about something like really like about mosses or something, sort of, they go really, really in depth. Whereas most fiction writers, we sort of like magpies, we just take little bits of things and put them in our fiction. There's no sort of in-depth knowledge, really. That's certainly true for me, anyway.
I don't know. I like to think that writers, the writers I really enjoy are the ones that create a world where I feel like they know a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because you have to do plenty of research and not put it in your book, I guess. It's nice when you're reading other, someone's writing, and it feels like they've done an awful lot of research. I like Kate Ellis's books. I don't know if you've read any of hers, but there's often sort of an archaeological element to them, and they always feel really, really researched, whatever she's writing about.
Very big fan of Kate Ellis's.
Oh, are you? Yeah, no, her books are great.
Yeah, me and my dad, we love them.
Oh, do you?
We'll buy them and share.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. No, she's really good. She's local to me. Well, not local to me in Wales. She's local. I'm at my dad's in Cheshire, and she's a Cheshire writer. So yeah.
She is. We've had her on in the group.
Oh, have you? Brilliant. Yeah. And she's written a lot of books, hasn't she? Maybe 20, is it? 20, 25, something like that?
They're all set. There was a series set in York, wasn't there? But it's not York. It's got a different name. And then there's a series set in like Dartmouth. But it's Tradmouth.
Yeah. Okay. I went to the launch of her. I don't know if it was the most recent, or certainly since I think it was. Do you know what? I can't even remember if it was before or after the pandemic. I sort of put everything pre or post pandemic. I can't remember. I went to a book launch. I had it in my local bookshop here, and it was great. She was just a really good talker as well. There's excellent talks.
Yeah, she is. She's fascinating. And I know I've been to Dartmouth like a few times. So it was quite nice when we were talking, because she could tell me where like Jerry's cottage was.
Okay.
And things. And I was like, yeah, I can actually imagine that, because I've been to Dartmouth, like she was saying, oh, it's like you go here and then go up a bit and it would be there. And it was like,
it's great when you can imagine where something is. And my next book is going to be set in some less well known than St David's or Cordy Island. Actually, it's called Brecfa Forest, which is, it used to be an ancient forest called Glencothi Forest, and then it was gradually sort of the trees came down, and then in the 20th century they replanted it, and it's all conifers now. It doesn't look that great, to be totally honest. I'm not a big fan of masses of conifer plantations, but it is, they've done lots and lots of cycle tracks and so on. And I like the sort of fact it's based on an old forest, so there's that mythology bit that I enjoy. But it's also where my family are originally from. They were tenant farmers on the hill. The farmhouse doesn't exist now. It was dynamited in the mid 20th century to make way for the forest, basically. But I love that, the idea of, and I've set it in a sort of imaginary place in the forest, but it exists. There's nothing there, but I know the spot that it is, and then you can sort of think of the tracks and everything going up to it, because it's, you know, sort of all alive in your head, really.
I'm intrigued as to where you're going to go next with the characters, actually, because you had quite an inventive way of getting like the main character involved in this investigation. So I'm kind of curious as to how she's going to keep getting like re-involved in more things.
Yeah. So when I wrote The Birthday Girl, I wasn't sure if it was going to be a series. I just had an idea for a plot on an island, and I wanted to write about a poisoner. That was the main incentive for me, the island setting, and I wanted to write about a poisoner. And at the end of the book, so my main character, Mallory, is an ex-Met detective who's been invalided out of the Met and takes a job as a night manager on the hotel. And so that was my sort of plot, really. And then my publisher, Canello, said, well, we're interested in, you know, a Welsh-based series, because, you know, Scottish crime fiction is massive. And we think Welsh fiction is up and coming, which is, of course, music to my ears. So I was like, yeah, I'd love to do a series. But there's quite a lot of deaths in The Birthday Girl, and I'd killed off loads of people. But fortunately, my main character, Mallory, was still alive. And I said, well, that's fine, but I've got to think of a way that Mallory can get involved in other crimes, because there's a reason why she's involved in solving the Birthday Girl crime, because she's a night manager, she's on this island, the storm comes in and so on. So she's there. But how am I going to insert her into like the police investigation of Dyfed-Powys Police, for example? And what happened was, interestingly, is that I had a student, so I do teach crime fiction, and one of my students was an ex-copper. And he was in the Greater Manchester Police, and he left it about, I think about 15 years ago, and he became a teacher. And he was doing my crime fiction classes because he was writing a crime novel, and he had lots of, obviously, police experience. And then I saw him about a year ago, and I said, how's teaching? And he says, I've left teaching. He says, all the kids came back from lockdown feral. And he was like, no. You probably, you know, sort of empathise, Caroline. But so he said, I've gone back to the police. And I was really surprised, because the way he spoke about the police, I didn't think he would go back. And he said, I've gone back as a civilian investigator. And I thought, that is absolutely fascinating, because you've got all the police experience, but it's cheaper for Greater Manchester Police, for example, to appoint a civilian investigator to investigate. He was doing murder cases rather than train up a detective. So that's the model I've used for Mallory. So for the second book, she is asked by DI Harry Evans, who is the sort of police side of it. Now, he makes a brief appearance in The Birthday Girl, but he's much more of a character in The Sixth Lie, so that I can sort of balance a police procedural element along with Mallory, who is ex-police, but she's a civilian investigator, and she's asked to go back in to Dyfed-Powys to investigate a crime. And that's the model I'm now using for this series. So in the third book, we're not giving anything away at the end, where she says, right, that's it. I've helped you out, and I'm kind of like not doing it anymore. And he's like, yeah, right. And for the next book, again, it's slightly different. He doesn't go to her for the next book. I tell you who makes a reappearance in the next book, Elsa on the hotel. You know, I don't know if you remember from The Birthday Girl, there was a chamber, a cleaner in the hotel, young teenager. She makes a reappearance in the next book. And ask Mallory for help, but again, she's appointed as the civilian investigator. So yeah, it's a really good point about unless you're writing police characters who naturally would be at a crime scene, it's really hard to put somebody outside in the heart of the investigation. And you know, that's how I've managed to do it, by asking my friend, you know, what responsibilities you have, and basically you do all the stuff. You interview suspects and take part in the investigation. You just don't have powers of arrest. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's interesting. You realise policing was less scary than teaching.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe it. But yeah, you know, it's you know, whatever, you know, whatever you want to, you know, sort of do with your career and so on. 15 years of teaching is quite a lot, because we were talking about this earlier, because I've taught briefly, well, obviously I teach adults now, but I've taught teenagers. I mean, it does take it out of you.
I've taught teenagers for about 20 years.
Have you?
Over 20 years.
Didn't you win an award?
Last year, no, I was highly commended for an award. I was like a runner-up.
Oh, brilliant. Congratulations. That's great.
But I used to teach kids that had been excluded from like all the other schools in Leeds, and we had someone who came out and from the army and had been like blown up and to the army and things, and was like thinking about being a teacher, and he lasted less than 2 weeks.
Oh, really? What I found it really good, because I taught Greek teenagers when I was living in Greece, and what I found it really good for is standing up in front of people that I don't have the fear. And it's not because I've been trained to stand up. Well, I haven't I, through teaching, but you know, it was just, you do it day in, day out. And I was teaching English as a foreign language, so there was a lot of rotation of classes and so on, meeting new people all the time. And it really, really helped me when I became a writer, you know, to do all these events. And when I do a lot of interviewing, you know, moderating and chairing of panels. And again, the fear's not there, because I've done the, you know, crowd control of teenagers, and adults generally are much, much better behaved.
And they tend to ask you less weird questions.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, once you've like been in a class of teenagers and you've survived their questions, you can normally manage fairly well.
Yeah, exactly.
Alex is asking, what was your favourite piece of research from your 3 series?
Well, my favourite piece of research. One of them was that. So my second Rhiannon Ward book, The Shadowing, is set in the workhouse in, well, I don't know, you can either call it Southwell in Nottinghamshire or Southall. The correct name is Southall, but it's spelt Southwell. The correct name is Southall, but unless you're local to Southwell, and then you call it Southwell. And there was a workhouse there, and it was one of those examples where researching the workhouse inspired the plot. Because I'd had this idea for the workhouse, I'd done a lot of research on workhouses, but when I actually went there and it really drilled down into what life was like in the workhouses, this is my book set in the 1830s, it was absolutely fascinating. And there's no way I would have known this stuff without visiting the place. So, for example, when you go there, there's 4 exercise yards. So I knew before I started researching that men and women were split up. So the men were put in one lot of dormitories and the women put in another lot. So I expected to be 2 exercise yards, so families were separated. But there were 4. And the reason for that was that men and women were split into the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. So you had an exercise yard for deserving poor men. So if you'd lost your arm in an industrial accident, for example, you were deserving poor. Then you had an exercise yard for undeserving poor men. If you'd be like drunk yourself into poverty, you were undeserving poor. And there's ditto with the women. Well, you can guess what the undeserving poor women had been up to. So, and the reason they separated the exercise yards was because of moral contagion, the Victorian fear of moral lack of morality spreading. And I just found that fascinating, and I really weaved it into the plot. And I never would have known that without visiting the place. This idea that a board of governors made a moral judgment on the fact you had no money. I mean, it happens now, doesn't it? We all make moral judgment. Well, lots of people make moral judgment about why people are living in poverty. And it's one of those things that just goes back as far as the poor, because before the workhouses were built, the the parish was responsible for the poor. So they were paupers, were given there was a pot of money in the parish. And what would happen was that people who were working hard on the land, for example, would say, I'm working really hard, and Mrs. Jones in that cottage over there is sitting on a chair and doing nothing and getting all the money. And the argument is, you hear that argument now, and that, nothing ever changes. So that was one of my favourite pieces of research where the actual setting and the ideas behind the setting really influenced the book, really.
Yeah, I love that when you go back in history and see that all the arguments are the same. You know, like the people are having the same conversation like hundreds of years ago about sort of teenagers being unruly or.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another piece of research that I hadn't realised was interesting at the time was when it was my Rhiannon Moore books, when I was researching for The Quickening. I set that in the 1920s, and I was reading a lot about the impact of the Spanish flu epidemic. And I was doing this in 2019, and I was reading about how people used to wear masks, and you know, lots and lots of people, lots of casualties, and people didn't want to mix. And when the Spanish flu epidemic had finished, people didn't want to talk about it. It was like, this has been an absolute horrible time. And then, well, The Quickening came out in the pandemic, but, you know, it was a weird sort of juxtaposition where I just remember thinking, God, you know, that must have been awful. And thank God we don't have those kind of epidemics anymore. And then by the time it was published in August 2020, we were in the middle of another major pandemic.
Do you ever walk into like a building and sort of find that really inspiring? So you were saying about the workhouse.
Yeah.
Where I work is an old Victorian hospital.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it's like a sanatorium style kind of place. And it just, sometimes you hit it in the right light and you think that must be, you know, your kind of mind can go kind of in like, what kind of things are haunting this place?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to go into buildings and see what their past lives were, I think it's fascinating, and I think there is a sort of imprint left on buildings. What happened? My mother-in-law was a nurse, so she's Irish, and she came over in the 60s and trained here in London, and she worked in a lot of like convent hospitals. And she's got loads and loads of stories of really creepy wards where, like, even the nuns wouldn't go there, and she's not bothered about ghosts or anything. So she would go and volunteer in the ward that no one wanted to man at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning. But she's got loads and loads of stories. And I do think, you know, these kind of institutions like hospitals and workhouses and prisons do have a sort of really interesting, you know, sort of feel in them when they go in. I can definitely walk into a building and know whether I like it or want to be there, or whether it inspires me. I mean, St. David's, where the Sixth Lie is set, I've been to loads of times. So it's sort of very, very, you know, it's a cathedral, it's Gothic. So I definitely find cathedrals and churches inspiring. I've got to stop myself not having a church in every book. There's definitely, well, obviously got a massive cathedral in the Sixth Lie, but in the previous book there's this sort of crypt on the island, so it's not church and it's former convent. And I've got a church, it's crept into book 3, which doesn't have a title yet. So yeah, I've got to be really careful, because I'd put a church in every one of my books if I wasn't careful.
I think that's nice though, and you had things like the stonemason in Sixth Lie, which is nice.
So my grandfather was a stonemason, and I really want to put him in there because it's an ancient trade. So I do a lot of family research with my cousin Gareth, and we go to all the little villages around Carmarthenshire and you know, find where our families were from. But my mum's father's family were from Abergorlich, which is by Brecon Forest, which is where book 3 is. And they were a family of stonemasons. So my grandfather was a stonemason, and when you look at the houses, they've got DE, David Evans, above them. So we even know which houses they were built. And my grandfather left Carmarthenshire. So this is how the family left Carmarthenshire and went to Cardiff. He was employed by the Welsh Folk Museum at the time, which is where they've got these massive grounds, and they go to a place and they unbuild a house brick by brick. They number all the bricks and they take it and put it in the museum as a sort of showing how traditional Wales was when all these old houses are being lost. And that's how he went to Cardiff. But it was still, you know, a massive trade of the craft of being a stonemason. So I was really pleased to put a stonemason in a book. And he plays quite an important role, doesn't he, in the Sixth Lie?
Yeah, he's a massive role, doesn't he?
it's a really interesting craft, and especially when it comes to churches and cathedrals. Now, my grandfather didn't work on churches and cathedrals, but there's a sort of really thriving industry even now of church stonemasonry. Although my grandfather, he would put his hand to anything to do with stonemasons. So, for example, my mum once drove into our front wall by mistake, obviously, and he just came down and rebuilt the wall, no problem. Put it back up. And then my aunt, who lived next to a church, her wall fell down. So he went over and put the wall back up. But because it was next to the churchyard, there were bones and everything sticking out. So we had to do a bit more of a repair than he wasn't expecting. So there's lots and lots of stories about stonemasonry, really, which is fascinating.
Well, that must have been nice to be able to sort of bring that in.
It was really nice. Because if someone had said, "Oh, you're going to write about stonemasons," it's like, how's that going to work in a crime novel? But it is fairly integral to the plot in this book. So
it is, yeah. We won't give away any spoilers, but it is, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
He's an integral person, isn't he?
He is.
I think family history as well is like really fascinating, isn't it? When you go and dig in.
It is, and what it allows you to do is a kind of, you can say something like 1820 or 1840 or 1860, and I can imagine it in my head because I've looked. Well, the first census is 1831, but 1841. So I've actually, but I've looked at the censuses and how fortunes change. And it's, even though I don't write historical anymore, I think it's this idea of people's lives in microcosm. Someone's put, I know how important family history was in your first book. What inspired that? So my first book in Bitterchill, I actually have a genealogist. She's the person who was one of the victims of the crime, and she helped solve what happened. And the reason I had a genealogist in my first book was that I was looking, again, to have a sort of police procedural element, but not for it to be just a police procedural, because I don't have any police experience. And I thought that, it'd be really hard, especially for your first novel. So genealogists, as you probably know, Kaz, or anybody who does family history, is that it's you have lots and lots of investigative skills, because a lot of it is you have various facts and then you have to try and work out a sort of process where you can prove that somebody is your great great aunt rather than somebody with the same name who has nothing to do with you. And so I'd done a lot of family history, and I thought a genealogist is really, really great to do that. And that's one of my sort of regrets, really, that I didn't use her as the series, because she could definitely hold a series, I think. Whereas I sort of went with the police side of it. But I do try and sort of weave a bit of family history into it, because it's just absolutely fascinating. And from a personal point of view, I like to see how far, because I grew up in England, and I'm a writer, and a lot of my family couldn't read and write until the early 20th century. I know because they put an X in their marriage certificates, and when they register the birth of their children, they've got a big X in like 1890. So they couldn't read or write. So it's like fascinating how like me are they when we come from, we've got different. Now I'm a writer. But for example, my great grandmother was her occupation in the 1880s was knitter of stockings. Now I'm a big knitter, and I knit socks, and it's like, yes. I have something in common with my great grandmother. She couldn't read and write, but she knitted stockings for a living, and I can really relate to that.
That's really nice. Martin Lee, he writes as MJ Lee. He's
yes,
Manchester based. He lives in Taiwan now, but one of his series is like police procedural and Manchester based, and one of them is a genealogist.
Oh, that's interesting, because he's Canello, isn't he? So I think we've got the same publisher. I must read one of those books, actually.
I don't think his genealogical ones are Canello, but
okay.
They're great. It's a whole series with one, but there is a crossover in the police procedural where she goes and helps.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, because when they add, because I looked at the jobs for civilian investigator, because I wanted to get a feel of who else would apply for a role as civilian investigator other than an ex-police officer. But it would be I suppose somebody like a genealogist, if you've done a lot of sort of forensic research, might be able to pick up that role. I don't know. I mean, I don't know who they're recruiting. I suspect it's mainly people who've left the police force. But yeah, no, there's definitely lots of skills you get as a genealogist. I find it fascinating, but it's like going down the rabbit hole. And when you've got a book to write, like I have at the moment, I cannot do any family history because I could spend 3 hours, no problem. And then, those 3 hours are better spent writing my own novels. So I'm delivering my next book before Christmas, and I'm going to have Christmas looking at my family history again.
Yeah, my dad's, he was really into it. He did our family history, but he can only trace it back so far on his side. And then on my mum's side, it goes back to like Ethelred.
Oh my, really?
Yeah, the whole like roll of wallpaper that unrolls and it has like
you have to find somebody when you go that far back called a gateway ancestor, as in they're really, really famous, and then it opens out to like William the Conqueror or something. I haven't done anything like that. I'm a bit of a nerd, so I like to have documentary evidence. So if there's a sort of church record, that's fine, but if it's kind of anything like I just leave that.
I think the church records do go back fairly far though, because it's just like, my mum's the only person to leave where she's from, and like everybody else has just been in this little kind of small town radius.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's interesting.
So it probably was like I don't know how well he researched it. I was young when he did it, but
yeah, I love reading about anything to do with genealogy though, any sort of any novels, crime novels. So I'll definitely seek those out. What's the best book you've read this year, Kaz?
I was going to ask you that because I really like that you ask people what they're reading quite frequently. You share.
Yeah.
My favourite book this year is The Maiden by Kate Foster.
Okay, I haven't heard of that. Okay, it's crime, is it?
It is a retelling of a true crime. So
that sounds right up my street. Actually,
you would love it. It's kind of gothic. It is because it's a historical crime. So it's based on a ghost story in Corstorphine. And this woman killed her uncle and lover, and she was executed by the Maiden, which is like a guillotine.
My goodness!
They used for like the rich people.
Yeah.
And that happened. You can go and find like the reports of it. It's not giving away a spoiler.
And where's this? Sorry, where in the country is it?
Corstorphine, just outside of Edinburgh.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So you can Google the case. It's a famous case. The woman existed, and then she's gone from like the ghost stories and like the telling of it, and she's gone back and like made up her own fictional story of like about the woman who did it and like why she might have ended up killing.
That sounds fascinating.
Oh, yeah, wow. Really good.
Oh, that's brilliant. So what have I read? Do you know what? I read a lot more non-crime than I do crime, but one of the books I really, really enjoyed was the new Asa Larson. So she has a series starring the main character is Rebecca Martinson, and it's going to be her final book with that character. And I'm always a bit ambivalent about when they do that, how they're going to finish the character off. But it was really, really good. Absolutely fascinating. Scandinavian, so the really setting focus. I can't remember its name because I'm useless with book names. The latest Asa Larson was really, really good. And then I like a lot of non-fiction. And talking about family history, there's a writer, ex-BBC writer called Rory Cellan-Jones, and he's written a book called Ruskin Park about his mother's life, who worked as a secretary for the BBC, had an affair with his father, and they, for various reasons, they didn't, stay together. And it's the whole story, and that's absolutely fascinating. So that's one of my favourite books of the year, actually. Non-fiction, but I do love a good true family saga.
Do you know, I've discovered a load of non-fiction this year. I've really got back into reading it.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah. I think when we come to doing our top 10 list, there might be a few non-fiction books that sneak in.
Yeah, I also read The History of Witchcraft in 13 Trials. I really recommend that. That's non-fiction again, but it sort of gives a history of witchcraft. which is connected to another book. Not my Welsh series, which I can't really mention at the moment, but I've got a sort of witchy element. Not witchcraft as in, witchcraft, but got a witchy element to it. And I was doing a lot of research for that. But that's a really good book as well.
That does sound like I would enjoy that. Like books with a witchy element.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, watch this space.
I will. Yeah, definitely. You writing a book with a witchy element. That is
Yeah.
definitely going on my purchase list.
Oh, thank you. Oh, brilliant. I've just finished Victoria O'Dowd's new book, Murder Most Cold. See, I remembered that book title. I knew it had cold in the title. That's really good. So I read that
on my Kindle, ready to read.
Yeah, I read it on my Kindle. So that's really good. In fact, I must let her know rather than just sort of drop it casually into Facebook Live. But I really enjoyed that. So I enjoy most of the books I read. I think there's a lot of great crime fiction out there at the moment.
There really is. Do you have like sort of any writers that are on your definite, like a must-buy list? I call them your shut up and take my money authors. Do you know what I mean? Like the ones that it's got their name on the book and you're just going to buy it.
Yeah, quite random stuff though. Like I really like Jonathan Kellerman, the American writer. So, and he has his sort of his detectives are Milo Sturgis, and I just really Alex Delaware is his detective, and he's a psychologist. I've been reading those since the 80s, and they come out in hardback, and I buy the hardback. And you know what? He must have written about 28, 30 books, or maybe not that many. Maybe say 25. And I couldn't tell you, apart from the first one, When the Bow Breaks, which is in the 80s, I couldn't tell you the plot of any of them, to be totally honest. It's probably a bit like the Lee Child books. They're kind of, I just love the characters. You can do whatever you want with the plot, and I can't remember them, but I love each one. So I buy it in hardback. And I was reading them in the days, where America was the USA was a publication was often like a long way before British publication. So when I used to go to America, and you could go really cheaply, you get flights to the US really cheap, and I'd get the latest Jonathan Kellerman, and it wouldn't be out for another year in the UK, and I'd bring it home with me, not doing the trip just for the book, but yeah. So I'm a big fan of his, to be totally honest. And I know Sue Gunney, who writes novel Heights. He's a big fan of his too. There's quite a lot of us who like his books.
That's nice. Have you met him?
No, because I've met because I've been going to conferences and events over the years. The two people I'd like to meet, actually, one of them is Jonathan Kellerman, and the other writer who books I always read is Fred Vargas, the French writer. There's a woman called Fred Vargas, and I'd love to meet her as well. I think Crime Fest invite her every year, but I don't think she does UK crime fiction events. But her books are brilliant. Adamsburg is her French detective, and they're really, really great. So whenever there's a new Fred Vargas, which don't come out that often, because they're kind of hardbacks here, and it's obviously take a while to translate. Whereas when you go to France, they're in the supermarkets, but everywhere, but in French. I can't read French very well, so I don't buy them. But those two are the ones I absolutely love.
I always wondered if authors get to a point, where they're going to the conferences and things, and you still get really excited about meeting like your favourite author.
Yeah. So when I remember going to Crime Fest and sitting on the table at breakfast next to P.D. James, and I was like, I cannot believe P.D. James is on the next table. And then there was a Swedish crime writer called Maj Schervell who wrote with her husband the Martin Beck series. And she came to Crime Fest, and they'd written 10 in the Martin Beck series. And I had all 10 of my books with me. And her daughter was with her. She's since died, but her daughter was with her. And I said, look, I've got all 10. Do you think she'll sign all 10 of my books? And her daughter said yes, because she's so used to it. Because when they conceived the series, they decided they would write 10 books, and they wrote the plots of the whole 10. So they're famous for have written 10 books, and she signed them all, bless her. So, but that was a really big fangirl moment, because most writers writers they love, because that's why we become writers, because we love reading books, and there's people we want to be like, and yeah, so PG Jebs. And the other one was, and again it was Crime Fest, was Sue Grafton. I used to love her books. A is for Alibi, B is for Burglar. And I sat in the audience and listened to her speak, and it was like, I cannot believe I'm listening to Sue Grafton in real life. And I've been reading those since the 80s as well.
How does it feel though when you go to these events and have people like that, people coming up to you and having the same kind of response? Being like, I can't believe I get to talk to Sarah Ward, or...
I don't know if people think that. I mean, I had a message from a fellow writer who I won't mention who it is, only because she's connected to the book I haven't mentioned, the Witchy book. But she's had a book out as well, and she sent me a message that she'd gone to an event, and a reader had spotted that we were friends, Facebook friends. I think there was a photo of us together or something. And he apparently said to her, and Sarah Ward is my favourite writer. And I thought, I cannot imagine me being somebody's famous writer, favourite writer. It's just, while I have plenty of favourite writers, I can't imagine me being on someone else's list. And it's just, it just sort of a bit unbelievable, really. So I find it quite, sort of, but I do love it when people email me and say how much they enjoyed the books. And it gives you a really nice feeling. And especially if you've had a sort of like a bit of rubbish day and you come back and you've got to write something, getting a nice email is really, really great.
Is it quite nice being sort of championing having some Welsh crime fiction? Because I do know when we first started doing our live events, we really struggled to find Welsh. We wanted to do on our first festival, like sort of Irish, Scottish, Welsh, all the types of crime fiction.
Yeah.
And we couldn't find enough authors of Welsh crime fiction. And I think now you probably would.
You would.
I mean, there are a lot more, but...
There are. So I'm a member of Crime Cymru, which is the Welsh Writing Collective. So we're all getting together to try and promote Welsh crime fiction. So we did a whole load of events with Bridgend libraries recently. We all went to different libraries, and then we were sort of increasing our readership. But because I'm now in Wales, I do sort of events with Welsh authors. Like I've just done one with Bev Jones, whose book Wilderness was on Amazon Prime, was an Amazon Prime TV series with Jenna Coleman. So Welsh people are sort of promoting Welsh crime fiction a lot more. People like Philip Gwyn Jones, his books, Alice Hawkins, I did an event with recently. There are more, but I think there's a scope for an awful lot more. And what we'd really like is to see Welsh crime fiction as, read and up there as Scottish crime fiction and Irish crime fiction, for example. I think it's definitely needs to catch up.
Alice Hawkins' Bitter Remedy.
It's really
one of my top reads of this year.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good book. And it's not set in Wales, but there's definitely a strong Welsh sort of, there's a main character, but, there's a sort of really strong Welsh feel to it, although it's set in Oxford. And I think that's how, there's lots and lots of Welsh in England, for example, and reflecting that in crime fiction is also really, really important as well as having books set in Wales like mine. It's the sort of the whole Welshness. I think it can be really, really interesting. And Alice has really, done that really, really well about how Welsh crime fiction can be not set in Wales, basically. Although she has the Tyvee Valley series is also very, very good.
I do. I keep meaning to go. I get sort of caught up in reading for these, but I keep meaning to go back and buy more of her books because I loved A Bitter Remedy so much. I'm like, I must go back and buy.
Yeah. And going back to Welsh crime fiction, we're really trying to really push it with the Crime Cymru festival as well, which takes place in Aberystwyth, which is quite near me now. It's not near anywhere, it's quite near me now. But to promote amazing Welsh fiction.
Yeah, it looks like a cracking festival. It's kind of part, isn't it? 1 year online and then 1 year live.
Yeah, so we're just preparing 2024 now, which will be online. So it'll be in the middle of April. Not just Welsh crime writers from around the world. And then 2025 will be the in-person event again in Aberystwyth. I don't think the date's been announced yet, but again, it will be around in the spring.
Nice. Well, we're kind of at the end of our time.
Mm.
Do you want to wrap up for anyone who's watching, like what they're going to go away and buy?
Well, first of all, Kaz, thanks ever so much. I really appreciate what you do for authors, because you teach all day, which I know is a stressful job, and to invite us on afterwards is absolutely lovely. So thank you very much. So we were talking about crime fiction in general. We're talking about lots of things, actually. But one thing we were talking about also was my book, Sixth Lie, which is this... I can't do this properly. Which is the second book in my Welsh. Oh yeah, thank you. I couldn't angle it properly. Which is the second book in my Welsh-based series, set in St David's. Beautiful. It's a city on the edge of on the Pembrokeshire coast. And that came out 2 weeks ago. So if you're looking for a Christmas present for somebody who likes a bit of an atmospheric read with a police procedural element, that's for you.
It is. I've definitely earmarked someone for a copy.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Kaz.
But thank you so much for joining us tonight as well.
Thank you, and have a great evening. And thanks for everyone for joining us.